It barely fit then. "I have this," she said, holding up the dress, "and you have your interview suit." Ryan stood and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on their unborn child. "I hate that it's come to this. I hate that some networking party determines whether our baby has a father with a job." Emma leaned back against his chest. The smart thing would be to call her father. One phone call and their problems would disappear. But that would mean admitting she'd been wrong to leave, wrong to think she could build a life without Carter money. "We'll make it work," she whispered. "We always do." But even as she said it, Emma felt the walls closing in. Saturday night would either save them or destroy what little pride they had left. Ryan's phone buzzed with another text from Derek. "Reminder, Saturday night is crucial for your future at Henderson. Don't disappoint." Emma closed her eyes and tried to imagine herself in that world again. The world of charity galas and designer gowns, where her father's name opened every door. She'd sworn she'd never go back. But sometimes life forces you to choose between your principles and your survival. "What if we don't belong there?" Ryan asked softly. Emma turned in his arms, seeing her own fear reflected in his eyes. "Then we'll belong to each other. That's all that matters." As they held each other in their tiny apartment, neither of them could imagine that Saturday night would change everything. Not just their financial situation, but the very foundation of who they thought they were. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Emma's mood perfectly. She stood in front of their cracked bathroom mirror, trying to zip up the navy dress that had fit her 3 years ago. The fabric strained across her pregnant belly, and she could barely get the zipper halfway up her back. "Ryan," she called, her voice tight with frustration. He appeared in the doorway, already struggling with his own outfit. His interview suit was wrinkled despite their best efforts with their broken iron, and the shirt collar was slightly frayed. "I can't zip this," Emma said, tears threatening. "I look ridiculous." Ryan moved behind her, gently working the zipper. "You look beautiful. You always look beautiful." But Emma could see the truth in the mirror. The dress was too small, too old, too obviously cheap. Her shoes were comfortable flats instead of elegant heels. Pregnancy had swollen her feet beyond recognition. Her hair, which she'd tried to style with drugstore products, looked flat and lifeless. "Look at us," she whispered. "We're going to stick out like a broken thumb." Ryan's reflection met her eyes in the mirror. His suit jacket pulled tight across his shoulders. The pants were a half-inch too short, and no amount of gel could make his hair look salon-styled. "Maybe we should just stay home," he said quietly. "Tell Derek I got sick." Emma turned to face him. "And then what? You get fired Monday, we get evicted by Friday, and our baby is born into homelessness?" The harsh reality hung between them like a weight. They'd calculated it down to the penny, Uber to the hotel, Uber back, maybe enough left over for a small tip. No money for coat check, no money for drinks, certainly no money to participate in the charity auction that would undoubtedly dominate the evening. Emma's phone rang, unknown number. "Hello," she answered cautiously. "Emma Carter? This is Jennifer Walsh from Riverside Children's Foundation. I'm calling to confirm your attendance at tonight's gala." Emma's stomach dropped. Carter, not Carter Brooks, not Brooks. Someone had connected her to her maiden name. "Yes, we'll be there," Emma managed. "Wonderful. I should mention that your father's company is one of our major sponsors this year. It'll be lovely to see the Carter family represented." The line went dead. Emma stared at the phone, her hands shaking. "What is it?" Ryan asked. "They know who I am. Someone figured out I'm William Carter's daughter." Ryan went pale. "Your father is going to be there?" "I don't know, maybe, probably." Emma sank onto their bed. "This is a disaster. If he sees me like this, if he sees us—" "What do you mean like this?" Ryan's voice carried an edge. "Like what, Emma? Like normal people struggling to make ends meet?" Emma looked up at her husband, good, honest Ryan, who worked 16-hour days and never complained, who loved her unconditionally despite the secrets she'd kept about her family's wealth. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean it like that. It's just complicated with him." Ryan sat beside her, taking her hands. "Em, I need to understand something. Your father is a billionaire, right? And we're sitting here worried about bus fare and grocery money. What happened between you two? Have you ever had to explain a choice that seemed reasonable at the time but sounds insane when you say it out loud? Emma looked at Ryan's confused, hurt expression and realized she'd never fully explained why she'd walked away from more money than most people could imagine. Emma took a shaky breath, still holding Ryan's hands in their cramped bedroom. The navy dress felt even tighter now, constraining not just her pregnant body, but her ability to keep hiding the truth. 5 years ago, my father arranged for me to marry Marcus Thornfield, she began, son of his biggest business partner. It would have secured a merger worth billions. Ryan's eyebrows rose. Arranged marriage? In this century? The tech world is smaller than you think. Alliances matter. Marcus was fine, educated, polite, completely boring. He saw me as a networking opportunity. I saw him as a prison sentence. Emma stood and walked to their tiny window, watching raindrops race down the glass. The night before the engagement party, I packed one suitcase and left. Changed my name back to Carter professionally, moved across the country, got the library job. I wanted to prove I could build something meaningful without his money. And you never looked back? My father tried to contact me for months, emails, calls, even hired a private investigator to check on me. I blocked everything. I wanted a clean break. Ryan joined her at the window. But Emma, if he cared enough to hire an investigator, maybe he just wanted to know you were okay. You don't understand what it's like, Emma said softly. Growing up, every friend I had wanted something. Every relationship was about what the Carter name could provide. I never knew if anyone actually liked me for me. She turned to face Ryan, her eyes bright with unshed tears. When I met you at that coffee shop, you had no idea who I was. You liked that I read books to kids and that I laughed at your terrible architecture jokes. You didn't see dollar signs when you looked at me. Ryan pulled her close, careful of her belly. I still don't. I see the woman I love, who happens to be stubborn enough to cut ties with billions of dollars to prove a point. Are you angry with me for not telling you everything? I'm trying to understand, Ryan said honestly. Part of me is frustrated that we're struggling when help is available. But I also admire what you did. It takes guts to walk away from that kind of security. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Car will pick you up at 6:30. Remember, tonight determines everything. They looked at the message together, the weight of their situation settling back over them like a heavy blanket. So what do we do? Ryan asked. If your father is there tonight, if people know who you are, how do we handle it? Emma thought about the last conversation she'd had with her father 5 years ago. He'd been hurt, angry, but underneath it all, she'd seen something that looked like pride. Pride that she was strong enough to make her own choices, even if he disagreed with them. We go, she said firmly. We hold our heads high, and if my father is there, I face him like an adult. Ryan checked his watch. 3 hours to go. Emma looked at their reflection in the window, him in his too tight suit, her in her too small dress, both of them scared and trying to be brave for each other. Ryan, I need you to promise me something. Whatever happens tonight, whatever anyone says about us or to us, remember that we built something real together. Something that has nothing to do with money or status. He kissed her forehead. I promise. But Em, you need to promise me something too. What? If things go really badly tonight, if we can't make it work on our own, you'll consider reaching out to your father. Not for us, but for the baby. Emma's hand moved instinctively to her belly. Inside, their child kicked, as if responding to the conversation about their uncertain future. Sometimes the hardest part about being proud is knowing when that pride might hurt the people you love most. The Uber driver kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror as they pulled up to the Riverside Grand Hotel. Emma could see his confusion. Passengers dressed for a formal event, but clearly not the usual clientele for a five-star establishment. You sure this is right? He asked as valets in pristine uniforms approached luxury cars ahead of them. This is it, Ryan said, his voice tight. Through the rain-streaked windows, Emma watched elegant couples emerge from Bentleys and Teslas. The women wore gowns that cost more than Emma's annual salary, their jewelry catching the light from the hotel's crystal chandeliers. The men looked comfortable in custom tuxedos, shaking hands and laughing as if they owned the world. Because most of them probably did. Emma, Ryan whispered, We can still leave. She squeezed his hand. No backing out now. They paid the Uber driver with exact change, leaving no tip. Emma felt his judgment as they climbed out into the drizzle, but there was nothing left in their account for niceties. The hotel lobby took Emma's breath away. Massive arrangements of white orchids, a string quartet playing near the marble fountain, and everywhere the soft murmur of money and power. Emma recognized the atmosphere immediately. It was the world she'd grown up in and deliberately left behind. Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, Derek Stone appeared beside them, his smile sharp. Glad you could make it. Wow, Derek's tuxedo was clearly custom-made. His wife Martha draped in emerald silk that probably cost more than Emma and Ryan's rent. Emma noticed how Derek's eyes swept over their modest attire with barely concealed disdain. Let me introduce you to some people, Derek continued, already moving toward a group near the auction display. Henderson Architecture needed to make some connections tonight. As they followed Derek across the marble floor, Emma felt every stare, heard every whispered comment. Her comfortable flat squeaked slightly on the polished stone. Ryan's hand found hers, and she could feel the nervous sweat on his palm. This is Ryan Brooks, one of our architects, Derek announced to a circle of expensively dressed strangers. And his wife, Emma. The pause before her name felt deliberate, loaded. Emma had the unsettling feeling that Derek knew exactly who she was. Lovely to meet you, said a silver-haired man in a perfect tuxedo. What do you do, Emma? I'm a librarian, Emma replied, lifting her chin slightly. The man's smile became condescending. How noble. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the crowd behind her. Victoria Blackwood. As I live and breathe. Emma's blood ran cold. She knew that voice, had been hearing it in nightmares for 5 years. She turned slowly, hoping she was wrong. She wasn't. William Carter stood 20 feet away, impeccably dressed in a black tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled. At 55, he was still commanding, still the kind of man who drew attention simply by existing. His eyes swept the crowd and stopped when they found her. For a moment, father and daughter stared at each other across the crowded lobby. Emma saw surprise flicker across his features, followed by something that might have been pain or anger. She couldn't tell which. Emma, Ryan whispered beside her. That's him, isn't it? She nodded, unable to speak. Her father was here, the man she'd spent 5 years avoiding. The embodiment of everything she'd run from was standing in the same room, breathing the same air. And judging by the recognition dawning on several faces around them, the evening was about to become much more complicated. Have you ever faced someone you've been running from, only to realize that all your reasons for running suddenly seem smaller in their presence? The weight of recognition settled over the ballroom like a suffocating blanket. Emma felt a shift in the atmosphere before she fully understood what was happening. The way conversations paused mid-sentence, the subtle turning of heads, the whispered exchanges behind manicured hands. Her father's presence had changed everything, transforming her from an oddly dressed pregnant woman into something far more complex, William Carter's estranged daughter. Derek Stone's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam that made Emma's stomach churn. She could practically see the calculations running through his mind, the social connections he could leverage, the business opportunities that might present themselves. The way Emma's hidden identity could be weaponized for his benefit. Emma Carter, Derek repeated, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure nearby tables could hear. I have to admit, I'm impressed by your commitment to anonymity. 5 years living as a librarian when you could have been running a tech empire. That takes either tremendous principle or tremendous stupidity. Emma felt Ryan's hand tighten around hers, his palm growing damp with nervous sweat. She could sense his confusion, his struggle to reconcile the woman he'd married with this revelation of her true background. The Emma he knew packed lunches in brown paper bags and clipped grocery store coupons. The Emma these people were discussing had walked away from more money than most people could comprehend. It wasn't stupidity, Emma said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. It was choice. A choice that's left you counting pennies while your husband faces unemployment, Derek observed with false sympathy. Forgive me if I question the wisdom of that particular decision. The circle of onlookers had grown larger, drawn by the magnetic pull of wealth and scandal. Emma recognized some faces from her childhood: board members of various foundations, tech industry leaders, society figures who'd known her when she was being groomed as William Carter's heir apparent. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to judgment to barely concealed excitement at witnessing such an intimate family drama. Across the ballroom, she could see her father engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly tense conversation with Foundation President James Morrison. William's body language was controlled but tight, his attention clearly divided between his official responsibilities and the spectacle unfolding around his daughter. Emma knew that look. It was the same controlled fury he displayed during hostile board meetings, the calm before a devastating corporate storm. "You know," said Margaret Wellington, a woman Emma remembered from countless charity events of her youth, "I always wondered what happened to you, dear. One day you were being fitted for your engagement dress. The next you'd simply vanished." Poor Marcus was devastated. Emma felt heat creep up her neck. Marcus Thornfield, the arranged fiancé she'd fled from 5 years ago. He'd been pleasant enough in the way that expensive furniture was pleasant. Well-educated, well-connected, completely devoid of passion or genuine emotion. Their relationship had been a business transaction dressed up in romantic language, and Emma had seen her future stretching ahead like a luxurious prison. "Marcus recovered quite well," Emma replied evenly. "Last I heard, he'd married someone far more suitable to his needs." "Yes, Priscilla Ashworth," Margaret confirmed with a knowing smile. "Lovely girl, very amenable to family expectations. Her father's pharmaceutical company merged beautifully with the Thornfield Holdings." The subtext was clear. Emma had disrupted not just a marriage, but a business deal worth hundreds of millions. Her personal rebellion had cost multiple families significant profit, and the society crowd surrounding her hadn't forgotten. Ryan shifted uncomfortably beside her, and Emma could feel his growing unease. He was beginning to understand the magnitude of what she'd walked away from, the world she'd deliberately left behind. She watched his face as he processed the casual mentions of mergers and holdings, the way these people discussed human relationships in terms of business advantages. "I must say," continued another woman Emma didn't recognize, "it's rather romantic in a way, like a modern fairy tale in reverse, the princess choosing the pauper over the palace." The condescension in her tone made Emma's jaw clench. These people couldn't conceive of choosing love over money, principle over profit. To them, her decision wasn't brave or principled, it was incomprehensible and therefore foolish. "Tell me, Ryan," Derek said, turning his attention to Emma's husband like a cat playing with a wounded mouse. "How does it feel to discover you're married to a billionaire's daughter? Does it change your perspective on your current financial difficulties?" Ryan's face flushed red, but his voice remained steady. "It doesn't change anything. I fell in love with Emma, the librarian, not Emma the heiress. Her family's money was never part of our equation." "How admirably naive," Derek chuckled. "Though I wonder if you'll maintain that perspective when the eviction notice arrives." Emma felt a surge of protective fury. Derek was deliberately humiliating Ryan, using their financial struggles as entertainment for the crowd. She started to speak, but a new voice cut through the conversation like a blade. "Well, well, little Emma Carter, playing dress-up with the common people." Victoria Blackwood had arrived like a perfectly coiffed storm system, her presence immediately commanding attention. At 45, Victoria embodied everything Emma had fled from: old money combined with new cruelty, beauty maintained through expensive procedures, and a social confidence that came from never having faced genuine hardship. Victoria's black gown was museum quality, her jewelry probably worth more than most people's houses. But it was her smile that made Emma's blood run cold, sharp, calculating, and absolutely merciless. "Victoria," Emma said carefully, remembering her mother's long-ago lessons about maintaining composure under attack, "you look exactly the same." "Flattery will get you nowhere, darling," Victoria replied with a laugh that sounded like breaking crystal. "Though I must say you've certainly changed. Pregnancy suits you, though I question the timing. Couldn't wait until your husband had job security?" The insult hit its mark perfectly. Emma felt the words like physical blows, each one calculated to cause maximum damage in front of the largest possible audience. Victoria was a master of social warfare, trained from childhood in the art of delivering devastating cuts wrapped in polite language. Our timing is perfect, Emma replied, lifting her chin slightly. We wanted our child to be born from love, not calculation. How wonderfully romantic, Victoria's smile grew sharper. Though I wonder if romance will pay for diapers and doctor bills. Love doesn't keep the lights on, does it? Emma could feel the crowd's attention like a physical weight. Some faces showed genuine discomfort with Victoria's cruelty, but others displayed the hungry fascination of people watching a car accident. This was entertainment for them, a real-life soap opera playing out at their charity gala. Ryan stepped closer to Emma, his presence solid and reassuring. My wife and I are perfectly capable of providing for our family, he said firmly. Victoria's laugh was musical and vicious. Oh, the struggling architect speaks. How refreshing to hear such confidence from someone whose boss is looking for reasons to fire him. Emma watched Derek's satisfied smirk and realized this was orchestrated. Victoria and Derek were working together, using Emma's revelation as an opportunity to destroy both her and Ryan in front of the most influential people in the city. You know what I find most fascinating, Victoria continued, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server, is the sheer selfishness of your choices, Emma. You had the opportunity to use your family's resources to do tremendous good in the world. And instead you chose to, what? Prove a point? Meanwhile, your husband loses his job, your child will be born into poverty, and your father loses his only heir. Each word was precisely chosen, designed to make Emma question every decision she'd made over the past 5 years. Victoria was attacking not just Emma's current situation, but the fundamental principles that had guided her life since leaving home. I am doing good in the world, Emma said quietly. Every day I help children learn to read. I run programs that bring literacy to families who can't afford private tutors or expensive schools. That's not selfish, that's necessary. How noble, Victoria's voice dripped with false admiration, and how utterly insignificant. Do you know what your father's foundation accomplished last year? They built 12 schools in underserved communities, funded literacy programs in 47 states, and provided educational resources to over 2 million children. But please tell us more about your little story time sessions. The words hit like arrows, each one finding its mark. Emma felt the magnitude of what she'd walked away from, not just personal wealth, but the power to make massive positive change in the world. How many children could have been helped with resources she'd rejected out of pride? Emma does more with her limited resources than most people do with unlimited ones, Ryan said fiercely. She doesn't just write checks. She shows up every day and makes a difference in real children's lives. How touching. Victoria turned her attention to Ryan like a serpent, focusing on new prey. The devoted husband defending his pregnant wife's minimum wage job. I'm sure that loyalty will be very comforting when you're both unemployed and homeless. Emma felt tears threatening and fought them back with everything she had. She would not give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her break down. But the stress was taking its toll. She could feel the baby responding to her elevated heart rate, shifting restlessly in her womb. You know what I think happened here, Victoria continued, her voice carrying clearly across the increasingly quiet ballroom, is that little Emma threw a tantrum when she couldn't have exactly what she wanted. She couldn't handle the responsibility that comes with real wealth and power, so she ran away to play house with the first man who paid attention to her. That's not true, Emma said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. Isn't it? Victoria's smile was triumphant. Because from where I'm standing, you look like a woman who traded away her family's legacy, her father's love, and her child's future because you were too immature to handle adult responsibilities. The ballroom had gone almost completely silent now, the normal dinner conversation replaced by the magnetic pull of social combat. Emma could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could sense the phones being discreetly positioned to capture this moment for social media posterity. Across the room, she saw her father rising from his seat, his face dark with the controlled anger. But the distance between them felt infinite, 20 feet that might as well have been 20 years of separation and misunderstanding. Tell me, Emma, Victoria said, moving in for what was clearly intended to be the killing blow. When your child asks why they grew up poor while their grandfather is worth billions, what will you tell them? That mommy's pride was more important than their future? The question hung in the air like a poison cloud, because underneath all her justifications and principles, Emma couldn't shake the fear that Victoria might be right. Had her desire for independence condemned her child to unnecessary hardship? Was her stubborn pride really worth more than her family's security? Ryan's hand found hers, squeezing tightly. When she looked at him, she saw not judgment or doubt, but fierce, unwavering love. He knew exactly who she was and why she'd made her choices, and he stood by her completely. "I'll tell them," Emma said, her voice growing stronger, "that their mother chose love over convenience, authenticity over appearances, and meaning over money. I'll tell them that real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives you touch and the principles you refuse to compromise." For a moment, Victoria's mask slipped, revealing something that looked almost like respect, but it was quickly replaced by renewed venom. "How inspirational," Victoria said. "I'm sure that philosophy will be very comforting when you're explaining why you can't afford their college tuition." That was the moment Emma felt something shift inside her, not just emotionally, but physically. A sharp pain shot across her lower abdomen, followed by another. The stress, the confrontation, the emotional upheaval, it was all too much for her pregnant body to handle. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her belly as another contraction gripped her. This wasn't the mild discomfort she'd been experiencing for weeks. This was urgent, demanding, impossible to ignore. "Emma?" Ryan's voice was sharp with concern. "What's wrong?" "I think," Emma's voice was breathless with pain and fear, "I think we need to get to the hospital. Now." The ballroom erupted into concerned murmurs and urgent whispers. Victoria stepped back, her triumph suddenly replaced by what looked like genuine alarm. Across the room, William Carter was already moving toward them, his face pale with fear for his daughter and unborn grandchild. Sometimes the body has its own way of ending confrontations that the mind can't escape. As Emma felt another wave of pain wash over her, she realized that all of Victoria's cruel words, all the social posturing and public humiliation, meant nothing compared to the safety of her child. The rest, the money, the family drama, the society gossip, could wait. Right now, there was only one thing that mattered: getting to the hospital before it was too late. The ride to Mercy General Hospital passed in a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and Emma's increasingly urgent contractions. Ryan held her hand in the back of the ambulance, his face pale with fear as he watched his wife struggle with each wave of pain. The EMT monitoring Emma's vital signs kept stealing glances at the man riding with them, William Carter himself, who had insisted on accompanying his daughter despite protests about space limitations. "Try to breathe through it," the EMT instructed as another contraction gripped Emma. "We're almost there." Emma focused on Ryan's eyes, using them as an anchor against the storm of physical pain and emotional chaos. 20 minutes ago, she'd been defending her life choices at a charity gala. Now she was fighting to ensure her baby would survive to be born at all. "It's too early," she gasped between contractions. 7 months. The baby isn't ready." "Babies born at 32 weeks have excellent survival rates," William said quietly from his corner of the ambulance. His voice carried the same calm authority he used in business crises, but Emma could see the fear underneath. "The hospital has an excellent NICU. The baby will be fine." Ryan squeezed Emma's hand tighter. "We're all going to be fine," he said, though his voice shook with uncertainty. The ambulance pulled up to the emergency entrance with a final wail of sirens. Within minutes, Emma was on a gurney being rushed through automatic doors, fluorescent lights flashing overhead like a disorienting strobe. The hospital smell, antiseptic mixed with something indefinably medical, triggered a wave of nausea that competed with her contractions. Emma Carter Brooks, 32 weeks pregnant, premature labor triggered by stress, the EMT rattled off to the emergency room team. Contractions every 3 minutes, blood pressure elevated but stable. A young doctor appeared beside the gurney, her face professional but kind. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. We're taking you straight to labor and delivery for evaluation. How are you feeling?" "Scared," Emma admitted as they moved through the hospital corridors, "and like I might throw up." "Both completely normal," Dr. Chen assured her. "We're going to do everything we can to stop or slow the labor. Give your baby more time to develop." They reached the labor and delivery ward, where Emma was quickly transferred to a bed surrounded by monitors and medical equipment. Nurses moved efficiently around her, attaching sensors, taking blood samples, asking rapid-fire questions about her medical history and current symptoms. "I need to call our insurance," Ryan said, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. "And our doctor, Dr. Martinez, needs to know we're here." Emma watched her husband trying to manage the practical details while she dealt with the physical crisis. They'd planned everything so carefully, Dr. Martinez for the delivery, the payment plan for the hospital bills, the timing that would give Ryan's new health insurance time to kick in. None of their planning had accounted for this. William stood quietly in the corner, clearly trying to stay out of the way while remaining close enough to help if needed. Emma could see him assessing the situation with the same strategic mind that had built his business empire, probably calculating costs and considering options she and Ryan couldn't afford to explore. "Mrs. Brooks," Dr. Chen said, settling into a chair beside Emma's bed, "I need to ask about stress levels. The EMT mentioned this started during a social event." Emma's face burned with embarrassment. How could she explain that her premature labor had been triggered by a public humiliation at a charity gala? That the stress of confronting her estranged father and defending her life choices had put her baby at risk? "There was a confrontation," Emma said carefully. "Some people were unkind about my personal situation." Chen's expression remained professionally neutral, but Emma caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Stress is a significant factor in premature labor, especially chronic stress combined with acute emotional trauma. Have you been under unusual pressure lately?" Ryan answered when Emma hesitated. "Financial pressure, job uncertainty, family complications." The understatement of the century, Emma thought. She looked at her father, who was studying the medical equipment with the focused attention he usually reserved for quarterly reports. William Carter could buy this entire hospital without affecting his monthly budget, but his daughter was lying here worried about whether their insurance would cover a NICU stay. "The good news," Dr. Chen continued after reviewing Emma's vital signs, "is that your contractions are beginning to space out. We've given you medication to help slow the labor, and the baby's heart rate is strong and steady." Emma felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "So the baby's okay?" "Right now, yes, but Mrs. Brooks, I need to be direct with you about something." Dr. Chen's tone became more serious. "Even if we successfully stop labor today, you're now considered high risk for the remainder of your pregnancy. That means more frequent monitoring, possible bed rest, and immediate medical attention if you experience any concerning symptoms." Emma's heart sank as she processed the implications. More medical appointments meant more time away from work, more copays, more stress about money. And if she needed bed rest, their already precarious financial situation would become impossible. "How much more monitoring?" Ryan asked, clearly thinking along the same lines. "Twice weekly appointments minimum, possibly more if we see any concerning signs. And if Mrs. Brooks experiences any more episodes like tonight, she'll need to be admitted for observation." Emma closed her eyes, calculating costs in her head. Their current insurance required a $50 copay for each doctor's visit, plus 20% of any additional testing. Twice weekly for the remaining 8 weeks would cost them at least $800, money they simply didn't have. Dr. Williams spoke for the first time since arriving at the hospital. "What would ideal care look like for my daughter? Not constrained by insurance limitations or financial considerations, just medically optimal care." Dr. Chen glanced between William and Emma, clearly sensing family tension. "Ideally, a maternal fetal medicine specialist, weekly ultrasounds, stress monitoring, possibly a period of hospital observation if the high blood pressure continues, access to the best NICU in the state if early delivery becomes necessary." Emma felt tears building as the gap between ideal and possible became clear. Everything Dr. Chen described was available if you had enough money or perfect insurance. For someone working at a public library with basic coverage, it was mostly out of reach. "And the cost?" William pressed. "Dad, don't," Emma said quietly. But William continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Total cost for optimal care through delivery?" Dr. Chen looked uncomfortable but answered, "Probably $20,000 to $30,000 beyond what basic insurance covers. More if NICU care becomes necessary." The number hung in the air like a death sentence. $20,000 to $30,000 more than Emma made in an entire year, more than she and Ryan had in their combined savings accounts, retirement funds, and emergency reserves. Ryan's face had gone completely pale. "We'll make it work," he said automatically, but Emma could hear the desperation underneath. "Mr. Brooks," Dr. Chen said gently, "there are programs available for families facing financial hardship. Social services can help explore options." Emma knew what that meant. Charity care, payment plans that would stretch for years, the humiliation of proving their poverty to access basic medical care. She'd seen families at the library navigating similar systems, filling out endless paperwork and waiting in bureaucratic limbo while medical needs went unmet. A soft knock interrupted the conversation. A woman in business attire entered, tablet in hand, an expression professionally sympathetic. "I'm Sandra Martinez from Patient Financial Services," she announced. "I understand you may have questions about coverage for tonight's visit and potential ongoing..." Emma's stomach clenched. The financial counselor, the person whose job it was to figure out how much money they could extract from patients before providing care. "We have insurance through my employer," Ryan said, though his voice lacked confidence. Sandra consulted her tablet. "I see Henderson Architecture Group Health Plan. Unfortunately, that's our basic tier coverage. Tonight's emergency visit will be mostly covered, but ongoing high-risk monitoring falls under specialty care, which has higher deductibles and copay requirements." Emma translated mentally. They'd pay for tonight, but everything else would be out of pocket until they'd spent thousands they didn't have. "What are our options?" Emma asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Well, you can certainly receive care here and work out a payment plan. We're very flexible about monthly arrangements. Or you might consider the county hospital, which has more robust programs for uninsured and underinsured patients." County Hospital. Emma had volunteered there during college, understaffed, overwhelmed, providing adequate care to people who couldn't afford better. It wasn't that the doctors weren't skilled, but the resources were limited, the waits were long, and high-risk pregnancies weren't exactly their specialty. William cleared his throat. "Ms. Martinez, if cost weren't a factor, what would you recommend for my daughter's care?" "Dad, please stop," Emma said more firmly. But Sandra's eyes had sharpened with interest. She'd clearly recognized the name Carter and was recalculating the situation. "Mr. Carter, if cost isn't a concern, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison is our top maternal fetal medicine specialist. She has privileges here and at University Medical Center, which has the region's premier NICU. For someone in your daughter's situation, Dr. Morrison would provide the absolute best possible care." Emma felt the familiar trap closing around her. The best care was available for William Carter's daughter. Not for Emma the librarian or Ryan the architect, but for the heiress who'd walked away from her inheritance. "That won't be necessary," Emma said, her voice sharper than intended. "We'll manage with our regular doctor and the resources we can afford." William's jaw tightened, and Emma could see the argument building in his eyes. This was exactly the situation he'd always feared. His stubborn daughter's pride putting her in danger. "Emma," he said carefully, "this isn't about pride anymore. This is about your health and the baby's safety." "It's about the same thing it's always been about," Emma replied, "whether I can live my life on my own terms or if everything ultimately comes back to your money." Ryan looked between his wife and father-in-law, clearly torn between wanting the best possible care for Emma and respecting her principles. "Can you give us a few minutes?" Ryan asked Sandra, who nodded and quietly left the room. Dr. Chen also excused herself, promising to return shortly with test results. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of hospital life in the corridor. Emma lay in the narrow bed, feeling the weight of her baby pressing against her ribs, and tried to figure out how they'd gotten to this point. 6 hours ago, she'd been reading to children at the library, secure in her choices and confident in her principles. Now she was facing the possibility that those same principles might compromise her child's health and future. Ryan said quietly, "maybe your dad has a point. Maybe this is bigger than what we can handle on our own." Emma looked at her husband's worried face, then at her father's controlled expression. Both men loved her, both wanted what was best for her and the baby. But accepting help meant admitting that 5 years of independence had been an illusion, that she'd only been free to make her own choices because she'd never faced a crisis too big to handle without family money. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if weighing in on the conversation. Emma placed her hand on her belly, feeling the strong, steady movement of the child who would soon need more than love and good intentions to thrive in the world. Sometimes the most principled choice is knowing when to set your principles aside for something more important than your pride. The silence in the hospital room stretched like a taut wire ready to snap under the weight of unspoken fears and stubborn pride. Emma stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in the acoustic panels, while her father and husband exchanged meaningful looks she pretended not to notice. The medication Durchen had given her was working. The contractions had slowed to minor twinges, but the emotional storm inside her head was far from over. "I need some air," Ryan announced suddenly, standing from his chair beside Emma's bed. "I'm going to find the cafeteria. Maybe call my mom and let her know what's happening." Emma knew it was an excuse to give her and William privacy, but she appreciated Ryan's emotional intelligence. Some conversations required space to breathe, and this was definitely one of them. After Ryan left, father and daughter regarded each other across the sterile hospital room. William had removed his tuxedo jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves, making him look less like a billionaire tech mogul and more like the worried father he was. Emma could see the exhaustion around his eyes, the way his usually perfect posture had softened with relief that she and the baby were stable. "You know," William said finally, settling back into the visitor's chair, "when you were little, you used to get the same stubborn expression when you were determined to do something difficult by yourself. You insisted on tying your own shoes, even though it took you 20 minutes, and you'd usually end up crying in frustration." Emma smiled despite herself. "Mom used to hide my shoes with laces just to avoid the daily battle." "Your mother was wiser than both of us," William said softly. "She knew when to let you struggle and when to step in and help." The mention of Emma's mother, dead for 3 years now from cancer that all their money couldn't cure, shifted something in the atmosphere. Margaret Carter had been the bridge between William's driven ambition and Emma's fierce independence, the one person who could manage both their strong personalities. "I miss her every day," Emma said quietly, "especially now with the baby coming. I keep thinking about all the things she won't be here to see." William's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. She would have been so excited about being a grandmother. She would have spoiled this baby absolutely rotten. "And she would have handled tonight better than either of us," Emma added. "She would have known exactly what to say to make this situation make sense." William nodded, then leaned forward slightly. "Emma, can I tell you what your mother would have said about tonight?" Emma hesitated, not sure she wanted to hear her father's interpretation of her mother's wisdom. But curiosity won over caution. "She would have said," William continued, "that love is more important than pride, but it's also more complicated. She would have pointed out that sometimes the most loving thing you can accept help, even when accepting it feels like admitting defeat." Emma felt fresh tears building. "But Dad, you don't understand what it was like growing up in your world. Every friend I had wanted something from our family. Every invitation was really about business connections. Every relationship was transactional." "I know," William said simply, "and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry that my success made your childhood complicated in ways I didn't fully understand at the time." Emma looked at her father with surprise. She'd expected him to defend his choices, to minimize her concerns the way he had during their arguments 5 years ago. "When you left," William continued, "I was angry, hurt. I felt like you were rejecting everything I'd worked to build, everything I'd hoped to leave you." "I wasn't rejecting you," Emma said, though even as she spoke, she wondered if that was entirely true. "I was trying to find out who I was when I wasn't William Carter's daughter." "And what did you discover?" Emma thought about the past 5 years, the satisfaction of helping children learn to read, the deep contentment of building a life with Ryan, the pride of supporting herself through meaningful work. But she also thought about the constant financial stress, the way poverty narrowed options and created its own kind of prison. "I discovered that I'm stronger than I thought," she said finally, "but also that being independent is harder than I imagined, and maybe more expensive than I can afford." William smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all evening. "Your mother always said you inherited my stubborn streak, but her generous heart. She said it would either make you incredibly successful or incredibly frustrated. Right now I'm feeling pretty frustrated." Emma admitted. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Dr. Chen returned with a tablet full of test results in a more relaxed expression. Good news, she announced. Your labs look excellent. The baby's heart rate is perfect, and the contractions have stopped completely. I think we successfully interrupted the premature labor. Emma felt a wave of relief so intense it left her dizzy. So the baby's okay? The baby is fine. But Mrs. Brooks, I meant what I said earlier about being high risk for the remainder of your pregnancy. Tonight was a warning. If we don't manage your stress levels and monitor you closely, this could happen again. And next time we might not be able to stop it. Emma nodded, though the practical implications of close monitoring still made her stomach churn. Ryan returned just as Dr. Chen was explaining the discharge process and follow-up care requirements. How are we doing? He asked, sliding back into his chair and taking Emma's hand. Better, Sni, Emma replied. The baby's okay and I can go home tonight. With strict instructions for rest and stress management, Dr. Chen added, and I want to see you in my office Monday morning to discuss ongoing care with a specialist. After Dr. Chen left, the three of them sat in another stretch of silence. Emma could practically feel her father's internal debate, his desire to help warring with his respect for her independence. Emma, William said finally, I want to propose something, and I want you to hear me out completely before you say no. Emma tensed, expecting an offer to pay for everything, to take over and solve their problems with his checkbook. What if, William continued carefully, we found a way for you to access the resources you need without compromising your independence? What if there was a middle ground between pride and practicality? What do you mean? Ryan asked when Emma remained silent. William pulled out his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a long list of contacts. I've been thinking about your literacy programs at the library, Emma, about the work you're passionate about and the impact you're having. Emma frowned, not sure where this was heading. What if the Carter Foundation funded an expansion of your programs? William continued, not as charity for my daughter, but as a legitimate investment in literacy education. You'd run the programs, hire staff, design the curriculum. You'd be the director of a major educational initiative. Emma's breath caught. Dad, what are you saying? I'm saying that your work matters, Emma. It matters enough that it deserves proper funding and support. And if directing a foundation-funded literacy program happened to come with health insurance that covered high-risk pregnancies, well, that would just be good employee benefits. Emma stared at her father, trying to process what he was offering. Not charity, not a bailout, but a job. A real job doing work she loved, with the resources to make a genuine impact. You'd be my boss, she said slowly. The foundation board would be your boss, William corrected. I'd be one voice among several. And Emma, if you decided you didn't like the arrangement, you could always walk away. Your independence would be intact. Ryan was looking between them with growing excitement. Emma, this could be exactly what you've been working toward. All your programs, but with the funding to really make them work. Emma felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. For 5 years, she'd told herself that accepting her father's help would mean giving up her autonomy, returning to the world she'd escaped. But what he was offering wasn't a return to the past. It was a bridge to a future where her principles and her family's resources could work together. What about Ryan's job? She asked. Derek made it pretty clear tonight that Ryan's position at Henderson is over. William's expression hardened slightly. Let me worry about Derek Stone and Henderson architecture. I think you'll find that Ryan's employment situation resolves itself favorably. Emma knew that tone. Her father was planning something, and Derek Stone was about to discover what happened when you publicly humiliated William Carter's family. I need to think about this, Emma said finally. Of course, William replied. But Em, don't take too long. Your health and the baby's health can't wait for perfect solutions. As if summoned by the mention of health concerns, Sandra Martinez from Financial Services appeared in the doorway again, tablet in hand and expression apologetic. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, but I need to go over tonight's charges and discuss payment arrangements for any follow-up care. Emma's stomach sank as reality reasserted itself. Whatever her father was proposing would take time to arrange, but the medical bills were immediate and growing. Actually, William said, standing and pulling out his wallet, I'd like to take care of tonight's expenses. Consider it a grandfather's prerogative. Dad, no, Emma started to protest. Emma, William interrupted gently, your mother would have my head if I let financial concerns interfere with your medical care. Let me do this one thing, please. Emma looked at her father's face, worried, loving, and determined to protect his family in the only way he knew how. She thought about her mother, who had always been able to balance pride with practicality, principle with love. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. William's smile was radiant as he followed Sandra out to handle the financial arrangements. Emma watched him go, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not surrender, but the beginning of a new understanding. You okay? Ryan asked, squeezing her hand. Emma thought about the question. Was she okay? Her father was back in her life, her carefully maintained independence was cracking, and she was facing the reality that love sometimes meant accepting help you didn't want to need. I think I'm starting to be okay, she said finally. For the first time in a long time, I think I might actually be okay. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let the people who love you help carry the weight you've been carrying alone. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft murmur of voices in the hallway. Emma lay propped up on pillows, her hand resting on her belly, while Ryan dozed in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed. The stress-induced contractions had stopped after several hours of monitoring, but the doctors wanted to keep her overnight for observation. A soft knock on the door made her look up. William Carter stood in the doorway, looking uncertain, an expression Emma had never seen on her father's face before. May I come in? He asked quietly. Emma nodded, and William entered, carrying a small bouquet of daisies, her favorite flowers as a child. Not the elaborate arrangements he could afford, but simple flowers that meant he remembered. How are you feeling? He asked, taking a seat in the second visitor chair. Better, scared but better. Emma's voice was hoarse from crying and exhaustion. The baby's okay. That's what matters. William nodded, his eyes filling with relief. When I saw you collapse at the gala, He trailed off, running a hand through his silver hair. I realized I've wasted 5 years being stubborn and hurt, instead of making sure my daughter was safe and happy. Emma felt tears threatening again. Dad, I'm sorry I left the way I did. I should have talked to you instead of just disappearing. No, William said firmly. You were right to leave. I was trying to control your life, treating you like a business asset instead of my daughter. The arranged marriage, the pressure to join the company. I thought I was protecting your future, but I was stealing your choice. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. 5 years of hurt and misunderstanding settling between them like dust being swept away. Can you tell me about him? William asked, glancing at Ryan's sleeping form. Your husband? Emma's face softened as she looked at Ryan. His name is Ryan Brooks. He's an architect, designs affordable housing. He's kind and funny, and he makes me laugh even when I'm crying. He has no idea how to network or schmooze, but he can draft building plans that would make you weep with their beauty. And he doesn't know who you are, really. He knows I'm William Carter's daughter now, obviously, but when we met, I was just Emma, the librarian who spilled coffee on his laptop. Emma smiled at the memory. He asked me out because I recommended a book he ended up loving, not because he wanted access to Carter money. William nodded slowly. And that's why you kept the secret? Partly, but also because I needed to know I could make it on my own, that I could build something meaningful without trading on the family name. And have you built something meaningful? Emma thought about her literacy programs, the children who came to the library every day, the families she'd helped learn to read together. Yes, I have. William smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all evening. I'm proud of you, Emma. Prouder than I would have been if you'd just taken over the company. Ryan stirred in his chair, blinking awake. When he saw William, he started to stand, but the older man waved him back down. Mr. Carter, Ryan said, clearly struggling with how to address his father-in-law. I want you to know that I love your daughter very much. I can see that, William replied. And please, call me Bill. We're family. Emma watched the two most important men in her life size each other up. She could see Ryan's nervousness, the way he was trying to figure out how to navigate this relationship with one of the world's most powerful men. I also want you to know, Ryan continued, that Emma and I didn't come to that gala hoping to get your attention or ask for money. We went because my boss made it clear my job depended on it. William's expression darkened slightly. Derek Stone, wasn't it? The man who announced your firing in front of a room full of people? Ryan nodded, his jaw tight. Monday morning, I clean out my desk. No, William said quietly. Monday morning, you start a new job. Both Emma and Ryan stared at him. Dad, Emma said carefully, what are you talking about? William smiled, and for the first time, Emma saw a hint of the ruthless businessman who'd built an empire from nothing. Let's just say that certain architectural firms are about to find their contracts with Carter Technologies reviewed, and certain other firms are going to find themselves in need of talented architects. I don't want charity, Ryan said firmly. Good, William replied, because I don't give charity. I give opportunities to people who've earned them. And from what I hear, you've been designing innovative, affordable housing solutions. That's exactly what Carter Technologies needs for our new community development initiative. Emma felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the heated hospital room. Her father was offering Ryan a real job, not a handout, a chance to use his skills on projects that mattered. There is one condition, William added, his eyes twinkling. You have to let me be involved in my grandchild's life. I've missed 5 years with Emma, and I don't want to miss any more. Emma reached for both men's hands, her husband's and her father's. I think we can manage that. As if summoned by the mention of grandchildren, the baby kicked strongly enough that all three adults could see the movement through Emma's hospital gown. Hello there, little one, William whispered, his voice full of wonder. Your grandfather is very excited to meet you. Sometimes the bridges we burn can be rebuilt stronger than they were before, especially when love is the foundation. 6 months later, Emma adjusted baby Grace in her arms as she unlocked the door to the newly expanded children's wing of the downtown library. The Carter Literacy Initiative plaque gleamed beside the entrance, but what made Emma proudest was the line of families waiting outside for Saturday morning story time. Miss Emma! Marcus, now 8 and reading chapter books, ran up to greet her. Is Grace coming to story time today? She might sleep through it, Emma laughed, looking down at her 3-month-old daughter, who was indeed fast asleep despite the excited chatter around them. Inside, the new children's area was everything Emma had dreamed of. Comfortable reading nooks, a dedicated craft area, and shelves upon shelves of brand new books. But the most satisfying part was seeing it filled with children and parents who genuinely needed this resource. Emma? A familiar voice made her turn around. Victoria Blackwood stood in the doorway, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual designer armor. Her court-ordered community service vest read volunteer in bright orange letters. Victoria, Emma said calmly, ready for story time? The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Victoria's charity fraud conviction had resulted in 200 hours of community service, which she was serving at the very library she'd mocked Emma for working at. The children are waiting, Emma said, not unkindly. Victoria nodded and moved to set up chairs for the families. Over the past 3 months, Emma had watched Victoria's initial resentment slowly transform into something approaching genuine engagement with the kids. Emma, Victoria said quietly as she arranged the last chair, I owe you an apology. Emma shifted Grace to her other arm. You owe me community service. The apology is extra. I was cruel to you at the gala, intentionally cruel. I was angry about your father exposing my financial irregularities years ago, and I took it out on you. Emma studied Victoria's face, looking for signs of manipulation. Instead, she saw genuine remorse in something that looked like exhaustion. Apology accepted, Emma said simply. Now let's read some stories. As the family settled in for story time, Emma caught sight of movement through the large windows facing the street. A familiar car pulled up outside, Ryan's new company car from Carter Technologies. He emerged carrying coffee for both of them and a small teddy bear that Grace was still too young to appreciate, but which he bought her anyway every few weeks. How's the sustainable housing project? Emma asked as he joined her. Incredible, Ryan's eyes lit up. We're breaking ground on the first development next month. Affordable homes with solar panels, community gardens, and a shared workspace. Your father's initial skepticism about my idealistic designs has turned into complete enthusiasm. Emma smiled, watching her husband's passion for his work. The job at Carter Technologies had been everything William promised, a real opportunity to use Ryan's skills on meaningful projects, not a handout disguised as employment. "And Derek?" Emma asked. Ryan's smile turned slightly wicked. "Derek's been trying to get a meeting with me for 3 months. Apparently losing the Carter Technologies contract put Henderson Architecture in serious financial trouble." Through the window, Emma could see Derek Stone himself sitting in his car across the street, presumably working up the courage to come inside and ask for Ryan's help securing new contracts. "Are you going to meet with him?" "Eventually, Ryan, Ryan said, "but when I'm ready, and when he's ready to treat people with respect instead of as expendable resources." Emma's phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Running late to story time. New grandfather privileges revoked if I miss another one." Emma laughed, showing Ryan the message. Her father had become the most devoted grandfather imaginable, showing up to every library event and spoiling Grace with age-appropriate educational toys. "Places, everyone," Emma called to the families gathered in the reading circle. "Today we're reading The Little Engine That Could." As she opened the book, Emma looked around the room filled with children, parents, and yes, even Victoria Blackwood helping a shy toddler find a seat. Outside, Derek waited in his car, humbled and hoping for a second chance. Somewhere across town, her father was probably speeding to get here in time to watch his granddaughter's first official story time. "I think I can. I think I can," Emma read aloud, her voice carrying across the quiet room. Grace stirred in her arms, opening her eyes at the sound of her mother's voice. For a moment, mother and daughter looked at each other, and Emma saw Ryan's stubborn determination reflected in Grace's tiny features, along with her own quiet strength. The little engine in the story made it over the mountain through persistence and belief in herself. Emma thought about her own mountain, leaving her father's world, building a life with Ryan, facing down Victoria's cruelty, and finding her way back to family on her own terms. I thought I could," she finished, closing the book as the children clapped. Through the window, she saw her father's car pull up just as Derek finally gathered the courage to get out of his own vehicle. The two men nodded politely to each other on the sidewalk, former business partners now on opposite sides of Fortune's wheel. William Carter entered the library carrying flowers for Emma and a children's book he had written himself about a young woman who chose her own path. It was scheduled to be published next month, with all proceeds going to literacy programs. "Did I miss it?" he asked, slightly out of breath. "Just finished," Emma said, standing to greet him, but Grace stayed awake for the whole thing. William's face lit up as Emma placed his granddaughter in his arms. "Hello, beautiful girl. Did you like your first official story time?" Grace gurgled contentedly, one tiny fist grasping her grandfather's finger. "She's going to be a reader," William declared confidently. "I can tell." Emma looked around the library that had become more than just her workplace. It had become her mission, her community, her proof that meaningful work mattered more than easy money. She watched Victoria helping clean up after story time, Derek outside gathering courage to face his former employee, Ryan discussing architectural plans with interested parents, and her father completely enchanted by his granddaughter. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's building something so beautiful that your critics can't help but want to be part of it. "What do you think, Grace?" Emma whispered to her sleeping daughter, ready to change the world one story at a time. As her family, chosen and biological, old and new, gathered around her in the library filled with books and possibility, Emma Carter Brooks knew that every choice she'd made, every bridge she'd burned and rebuilt, had led to this moment, and she wouldn't change a single word of her story. She was 7 months pregnant, already exhausted, already struggling to pay the bills. But that night at the most powerful charity gala in the city, everything collapsed. Laughter, insults. A glass of red wine poured down her dress as the entire room watched. Her husband's career hung by a thread, and the crowd wanted to see her break. What they didn't know was that someone else was watching too, someone with the kind of power that can destroy empires with a single phone call. This is not just humiliation. This is war. And before the night is over, you'll see exactly how the mighty fall. If you want to see how it all unfolds, stay until the end. And don't forget to like, comment, share this story, and subscribe for more dramas that hit harder than reality itself. Emma Carter Brooks pressed her palm against her swollen belly as another sharp pain shot through her lower back. 7 months pregnant and still shelving books at the downtown public library, she wondered how much longer she could keep this up. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the worn carpet where children gathered for story time. "Miss Emma, are you okay?" asked 7-year-old Marcus, tugging at her maternity dress. His concerned brown eyes reminded her why she loved this job despite the meager pay. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Emma smiled, kneeling carefully to his level. "Just getting ready for my own little one to arrive." As the children dispersed to their parents, Emma's phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. "Still at office. Derek breathing down my neck about Monday's layoffs. Love you." Emma's heart clenched. Ryan had been working 16-hour days for weeks, desperately trying to prove his worth at Henderson Architecture. With the baby coming and her modest librarian salary barely covering groceries, they needed his job now more than ever. Walking to her desk, Emma pulled up their online banking. $847. That was it. Rent was due in 5 days. The hospital payment plan started next week, and they still needed to buy a crib. She touched the faded photo taped to her monitor. Her and Ryan on their wedding day 3 years ago. They'd been so hopeful then, so sure that love and hard work would be enough. Emma had deliberately told Ryan her family was dead to her, not mentioning they were very much alive and swimming in billions of dollars. She'd made her choice 5 years ago when she walked away from William Carter's tech empire, refusing the arranged marriage to a business partner's son. The library's evening volunteer, Mrs. Henderson, shuffled over with a knowing smile. "That husband of yours working late again?" "The architecture firm is going through layoffs," Emma explained, logging off her computer. "Everyone's on edge. You know, dear, there's no shame in asking family for help when you're expecting." Emma's jaw tightened. If only it were that simple. "We'll manage. We always do." As Emma gathered her things, she couldn't shake the feeling that their carefully constructed life was about to crumble. She'd built everything on the principle of independence, of proving she could make it without her father's money. But with a baby coming and Ryan's job hanging by a thread, that principle was being tested like never before. The autumn rain had started by the time Emma reached the bus stop. She pulled out her phone to check the schedule and noticed an email in Ryan's shared inbox that made her blood run cold. The subject line read, "Henderson Architecture, Holiday Gala, Mandatory Attendance." Have you ever had to choose between your values and your survival? That moment when doing the right thing might cost you everything you've worked for. Emma stared at that email invitation, knowing it represented either salvation or destruction for their little family. Ryan Brooks loosened his tie as he climbed the stairs to their cramped one-bedroom apartment. The building's elevator had been broken for 3 months, and by the 7th floor, his legs felt like lead. Through their thin door, he could hear Emma humming softly, probably reading to the baby. "Hey, beautiful," he called, dropping his laptop bag with a heavy thud. Emma looked up from her rocking chair, one hand on her belly. "How bad was it today?" Ryan collapsed onto their second-hand couch, running his hands through his hair. "Derek called another meeting. 3 more people got their notice. I'm pretty sure I'm next unless—" He trailed off, pulling out the printed email. "Unless we go to this thing." Emma read the elegant invitation twice. "The Riverside Children's Foundation Gala. That's this Saturday." Derek was very clear, Ryan said bitterly. "Show up, schmooze with potential clients, prove I'm worth keeping around, or clean out my desk Monday morning." Emma studied the guest list attached to the email. Her father's name wasn't on it, but she recognized several others from her privileged childhood. Victoria Blackwood, the charity queen who'd once tried to set Emma up with her nephew. Derek Stone, who'd probably paid a fortune for his table. "We can't afford this," Emma said quietly. "The tickets alone are $500 per person. Derek's covering our table." "But Ryan's voice cracked, and "Look at us. Look at this place. How are we supposed to fit in with those people?" Emma walked to their tiny closet and pushed aside Ryan's work shirts. In the back hung a single formal dress, navy blue, bought for their wedding reception 3 years ago.